The officer thought he was approaching an ordinary man outside an ordinary home. He had no idea he was standing in front of the person responsible for protecting the nation's justice system. On a quiet evening in Westbridge, the neighborhood looked like any other community across America. Families returned from work, lights turned on inside homes, and the streets slowly became calm as the day came to an end. Nothing about the peaceful scene suggested that a moment of national attention was about to begin. Behind one of those doors lived Adrian Carter, a man whose name carried significant meaning in the world of law enforcement, even though most people passing by would never recognize him. To his neighbors, he was simply a respectful homeowner who valued privacy and quiet moments away from his demanding career. But behind that ordinary appearance was a lifetime of service, discipline, and responsibility. Adrian Carter was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Years before reaching one of the highest positions in federal law enforcement, Adrian had spent decades learning what justice truly required. He had worked through complex investigations, studied the challenges facing communities, and built his reputation on patience, professionalism, and fairness. He understood that leadership was not about demanding recognition. It was about carrying responsibility even when nobody was watching. That evening, however, Adrian was not wearing a formal suit or standing inside a government building. He was simply at home, away from the public attention that came with his position. He believed that every person deserved moments where they were seen as a human being before they were seen through the title they carried. Several miles away, Officer Michael Turner began another shift with the same mindset he had developed throughout his career. As a local police officer, Michael believed his responsibility was to protect the community and respond when situations required attention. Years of experience had taught him to observe carefully, make decisions quickly, and trust his training. Like many officers across America, he understood that every interaction began with limited information. A person could be a stranger, a neighbor, or someone with a story nobody knew yet. Michael had built his career around the visible signs of authority. A badge, a uniform, and official procedures represented the role he served. But there was one thing experience could never reveal immediately: the complete story of the person standing in front of him. That was the hidden difference between the two men. Michael carried authority that was easy to see. Adrian carried responsibility that was impossible to recognize from the outside. One had a badge that showed his position. The other had years of leadership that remained invisible in an ordinary moment. Neither man knew that their paths were about to cross in a way that would challenge assumptions and reveal a much deeper lesson about judgment. The evening remained quiet. The neighborhood continued as normal. But sometimes the biggest moments in history do not begin with crowds, cameras, or announcements. Sometimes they begin with a simple encounter between two people who do not yet know the full truth about each other. Michael Turner had always believed that every situation had a beginning, and every beginning required careful observation. Throughout his years as a police officer in Westbridge, he had learned that decisions often had to be made with only a small amount of information available. A person standing in front of him was never just a person in a moment. They carried a history, a background, and experiences that could not always be seen immediately. But understanding that idea in theory was different from experiencing it in real life. For Michael, his career had been built around structure and responsibility. He respected the role of law enforcement and believed that public safety depended on officers being prepared, focused, and willing to act when necessary. His uniform represented years of training and commitment. The badge on his chest represented the trust placed in him by the community. He never viewed it as a symbol of superiority. He viewed it as a reminder of the responsibility he carried every day. However, like anyone who works in a demanding profession, Michael had developed habits based on repeated experiences. He had learned to notice details quickly, to identify possible concerns, and to form conclusions from the information available. Those skills helped him during countless situations, but they also carried a challenge. Sometimes the first impression of a person was only a small piece of a much larger story. Across town, Adrian Carter lived by a similar principle. His entire career had been dedicated to understanding people, evidence, and the complicated realities behind every case. As FBI director, he knew better than anyone that appearances could be misleading. A person's true character was not always visible in a single moment. That belief had guided him through decades of public service. Adrian had witnessed situations where assumptions created unnecessary divisions, and he had seen how patience and fairness could change the direction of difficult circumstances. That was why he valued humility. He knew that leadership was not measured by how quickly others recognized his position. It was measured by how consistently he followed the principles he represented. The contrast between Adrian and Michael was not about one man being important and the other being ordinary. Both had responsibilities. Both believed they were serving a purpose greater than themselves. The difference was that one carried a title known across the country, while the other carried a local responsibility known only within his community. Neither role was insignificant. Both required judgment. Both required trust. The difference was that one man's authority was visible, while the other man's authority remained hidden. As the evening continued, neither Adrian nor Michael expected their paths to cross. Adrian was focused on enjoying a rare moment away from the demands of federal leadership. Michael was focused on carrying out his duties with professionalism. But life often creates moments that reveal what people truly believe. Sometimes the most important lessons do not come from planned meetings or official conversations. They come from unexpected encounters where people must decide how they will treat someone before knowing the full story. The quiet neighborhood remained unaware of what was about to unfold. The world continued moving normally, unaware that two different forms of authority were about to meet. One represented the power people could immediately see. The other represented the responsibility people might never notice until the truth was finally revealed. Adrian Carter had spent most of his life learning one important lesson. The truth behind a situation was rarely found on the surface. Long before he became the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was a young investigator trying to understand the complicated stories behind every case he encountered. Those early years shaped the leader he would eventually become. He learned that justice was not simply about rules and procedures. It was about understanding people, protecting fairness, and recognizing that every decision could impact someone's life in ways that were not immediately visible. Throughout his career, Adrian had been placed in situations where patience mattered more than power. He had worked with people from every background and witnessed how quickly assumptions could influence judgment. Those experiences made him a strong believer in one principle: authority should always be guided by humility. When Adrian accepted the responsibility of leading the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he understood that the position was not a reward. It was a promise to serve, to protect, and to represent the values that the institution stood for. Despite his title, Adrian never wanted people to treat him differently simply because of his position. He believed respect was something that should exist before a person's achievements were known. That belief was one of the reasons he preferred quiet moments away from public attention. At home, he was not the director of a major federal agency. He was simply Adrian, a neighbor, a friend, and a person who appreciated the small moments that reminded him why public service mattered. The evening outside his home represented exactly that. There were no cameras following him. There were no officials standing nearby. There was no indication that the man walking through his neighborhood carried one of the most recognized responsibilities in American law enforcement. To anyone passing by, he appeared to be another resident enjoying a peaceful evening. But hidden behind that ordinary appearance was a lifetime of dedication. Adrian understood something that many people in positions of authority eventually learn. A title can open doors, but character determines what happens after those doors open. Meanwhile, Michael Turner continued his shift across Westbridge, unaware of the person whose path was about to intersect with his own. He had no reason to know Adrian's background or professional history. From his perspective, he was simply responding to a situation based on the information available to him. The moment was not about knowing someone's importance. It was about how people choose to respond when they do not know the complete story. That was the challenge waiting ahead. Adrian carried a responsibility that stretched across the nation. Michael carried a responsibility that protected his local community. Both believed in service. Both believed their work mattered. But sometimes the most meaningful tests happen when two people with different forms of responsibility meet without knowing the full truth about each other. The evening remained calm, but the foundation of a life-changing moment had already been created. A federal leader stood quietly outside his home. A local officer continued performing his duty. Neither man realized that their upcoming encounter would become a reminder that the greatest measure of authority is not how much power someone has, but how they treat others when they believe nobody important is watching. The evening had started like any other quiet night in Westbridge, but moments that seem ordinary can sometimes reveal the most important lessons. Adrian Carter stepped outside his home, enjoying a brief pause from the responsibilities that followed him every day. For a person who carried one of the highest positions in federal law enforcement, he valued these simple moments because they reminded him of the communities he had spent his career protecting. He was not thinking about his title. He was not thinking about public attention. He was simply a person standing outside his own home, unaware that the next few minutes would test the principles he had spent decades defending. Across the neighborhood, Officer Michael Turner continued his routine patrol. Like many officers, Michael understood that his role required attention, awareness, and professionalism. Every call, every conversation, and every decision represented an opportunity to build trust with the community he served. He believed preparation and experience helped him handle uncertain situations. Those beliefs had guided him through years of service. When Michael noticed the situation involving Adrian, he did not know the complete story behind the person in front of him. He only saw the information available at that moment. This was something every officer faced. A situation rarely arrived with every detail already explained. People were often judged within seconds, based on what could be observed immediately. But the most important details were sometimes the ones that could not be seen. Adrian understood this reality better than most. His entire career had been built around discovering facts that were hidden beneath the surface. He knew that first impressions could be incomplete and that patience was often the difference between misunderstanding and understanding. Yet he also knew that not everyone had the same experience or perspective. The challenge of fairness was making the right choice before the full story was known. As the interaction began, Adrian remained calm. He did not introduce himself by his position or attempt to change the situation by mentioning his authority. He believed that public service meant accepting the same standards expected of everyone else. His silence was not weakness. It was a reflection of confidence in the principles he represented. Michael, meanwhile, continued approaching the situation from the perspective of his training and responsibilities. He had no reason to believe that the person standing before him was connected to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. To him, this was another moment requiring attention and professionalism. Neither man understood the significance of the encounter yet. One carried a badge that represented local authority. The other carried a responsibility that reached across the entire country. But the difference between them was not only their positions. It was that one man's role was visible while the other man's role remained completely hidden. The neighborhood remained quiet as the moment continued. No one watching from a distance could have predicted how important this encounter would become. Sometimes history does not begin with a major announcement. Sometimes it begins with a simple conversation between two people who do not realize that their actions are about to reveal something much deeper about judgment, responsibility, and the meaning of true leadership. The moment continued without either man understanding the importance of what was happening. To Michael Turner, it was another situation that required focus, patience, and careful attention. His years as a police officer had taught him that every decision carried responsibility. He had learned to rely on observation, training, and procedure because those principles helped him serve the community effectively. In his mind, the situation in front of him was about following the information available at that moment. It was not about personal opinions or assumptions. It was about doing what he believed was expected of him. But there was one detail Michael did not know. The person standing in front of him was not an ordinary resident. Adrian Carter was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a person whose daily work involved protecting the integrity of the very system Michael represented on a local level. Yet Adrian never revealed his position. He did not believe his title should change the way a situation was handled. Throughout his career, he had seen how important equal treatment was. A justice system could only maintain public trust if people believed the same standards applied to everyone. Adrian knew that respect was most meaningful when it was given before someone's accomplishments became known. That belief shaped the way he responded. Instead of using his position as a shield, he allowed the process to continue. He understood that leadership was not about avoiding difficult moments. It was about showing the values you expected others to follow. As the situation developed, the contrast between the two men became clearer. Michael represented the visible side of authority. His uniform and badge immediately communicated his role. People understood what he represented before they knew anything else about him. Adrian represented a different kind of authority. His influence came from years of service, experience, and the trust placed in him by the nation. But none of those things could be seen from a distance. This difference created a powerful lesson. Sometimes the people with the greatest responsibilities are the ones who appear the most ordinary. The world often recognizes symbols of authority before recognizing the character behind them. Adrian had spent his life studying how quickly people could form opinions without knowing the complete story. He understood that a person could be judged in a single moment while carrying a lifetime of experiences that remained invisible. This was why he valued patience and understanding. Meanwhile, Michael continued performing his duties without knowing that the encounter involved someone whose decisions affected law enforcement across the country. He was not aware that the person before him had spent decades examining the same questions of fairness and accountability that guided his own profession. The situation remained calm, but the significance continued to grow. The two men stood on opposite sides of a moment neither expected. One carried a badge that could be recognized immediately. The other carried a responsibility that remained hidden. Neither knew that the truth about Adrian's identity would soon change how everyone viewed the encounter. The question was no longer only about what happened in that moment. The bigger question was what people would learn once they discovered who had been standing there all along. The truth behind Adrian Carter's identity remained hidden, but the situation was moving closer to a moment when everything would change. For Michael Turner, the encounter still appeared to be a normal part of his responsibilities. He continued to focus on the information available to him, believing that careful decisions were the foundation of professional service. He had spent years learning that officers could not rely on emotions or assumptions. They had to rely on facts, procedures, and judgment. But every professional also faced moments where the information in front of them was incomplete. Those moments revealed not only what people knew, but how they responded when they did not know the entire story. Adrian remained composed throughout the situation. He understood the position Michael was in because his own career had been built around understanding difficult decisions. As FBI director, Adrian had reviewed countless situations where people had to make choices under pressure. He knew that one moment rarely represented an entire person. A single decision could come from experience, misunderstanding, or incomplete information. That was why he believed accountability and fairness had to exist together. He did not want the situation to change simply because of his title. He wanted the process to reveal the truth naturally. For Adrian, the real test of a system was not how it treated powerful people. It was how it treated people before anyone knew they had power. That belief had guided him throughout his career. He remembered the many individuals who had entered the justice system without influence, connections, or recognition. They depended on fairness from people who would never know their names. Adrian believed he owed them the same respect by accepting the same standards himself. As the situation continued, small details began to create questions. The person Michael was speaking with carried himself differently from someone trying to avoid responsibility. There was a calmness and patience that suggested a deeper understanding of the process. But without knowing Adrian's background, those qualities could only be observed, not fully understood. Across the city, information about the encounter slowly began reaching people connected to Adrian's work. At first, it was simply another report requiring attention. But as more details became available, the importance of the situation became clearer. The name connected to the encounter was one that immediately changed the level of concern. Adrian Carter was not just another resident. He was the person responsible for leading one of America's most important law enforcement agencies. The realization created a different atmosphere. People who had only seen a local situation now understood that the moment involved a national figure. But Adrian's response remained the same. He did not view the discovery of his identity as an opportunity to gain special treatment. Instead, he saw it as another chance to demonstrate the values he had always defended. Leadership was not proven when people recognized your position. Leadership was proven when you continued to follow your principles before they did. Michael was about to learn that the person he had encountered carried a responsibility far beyond the boundaries of Westbridge. The badge he wore represented authority in that moment. But the truth about Adrian revealed another kind of authority, one built through years of service and trust. The quiet evening outside a home had become something much larger. It had become a test of whether fairness remained the same when the person involved was finally known. The moment Adrian Carter's identity became known, the situation changed from a private encounter into a matter that required careful attention. But for Adrian, the most important part was not the reaction from others. It was the principle behind how the situation would be handled. Throughout his career, he had witnessed countless moments where people judged events before understanding all the facts. He knew that truth required patience, and justice required discipline. That was why he remained focused on the process rather than the attention surrounding his position. The discovery that Adrian was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation created immediate concern among those who learned about the encounter. The person who had seemed like an ordinary homeowner was now recognized as one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officials in the country. But Adrian did not want his title to become the center of the story. He believed the real question was not who he was. The real question was whether the same standards of fairness would exist before anyone knew his identity. That belief reflected everything he had built his career around. Meanwhile, Michael Turner began to see the situation from a different perspective. The information he received changed his understanding of the moment, but it also created an opportunity for reflection. He thought about the countless interactions officers experienced every day. Many people they encountered had stories that could never be understood within a few minutes. Some had years of service behind them. Some carried responsibilities that were invisible. Some had experiences that shaped who they were long before the moment an officer met them. Michael realized that professional judgment required more than reacting to what was immediately visible. It required awareness that every person represented a much larger story. Police Chief James Holloway was informed about the situation and understood the importance of handling it carefully. He knew this was not only about one encounter. It was about the public trust placed in the department. Strong institutions were not created by avoiding difficult questions. They were created by having the courage to examine decisions honestly and improve when necessary. The chief believed accountability was not an attack on professionalism. It was a foundation of professionalism. As conversations began within the department, the focus shifted toward facts and responsibility. What information was available at the time? How were decisions made? Were procedures followed correctly? These questions were important because fairness depended on understanding the complete picture, not simply reacting to public opinion. Adrian supported that approach because it represented the same values he had defended throughout his years in public service. He did not seek punishment or personal recognition. He wanted the system to learn from the moment. The situation revealed something deeper about authority. A position can give someone influence, but character determines how that influence is used. Michael had authority through his badge. Adrian had authority through decades of service. Both forms of responsibility mattered, but both also required humility. The encounter that began outside a quiet home had now become a reminder that leadership is tested most when people do not know the full story. The most important lesson was not about one person having power over another. It was about whether every person, regardless of status or background, receives the same respect before their identity is revealed. As the review continued, The focus moved beyond the details of one evening and toward a larger conversation about responsibility, fairness, and the meaning of public service. Adrian Carter understood that moments like this often revealed more than the situation itself. They revealed how people viewed authority, how institutions responded to challenges, and whether principles remained strong when circumstances became complicated. For Adrian, the answer had always been clear. Justice was not about protecting those with influence. It was about creating a system where every person could expect fairness, regardless of their position. That belief was the foundation of his career. He had spent decades working within law enforcement, seeing both the strengths and challenges of the system he represented. He knew that trust was built slowly through consistent actions. A single moment could damage confidence, but a single moment could also become an opportunity for improvement. Adrian believed the difference came from how people responded afterward. Michael Turner also began viewing the encounter through a wider lens. The experience caused him to reflect on the responsibility that came with his role. He had always taken his duties seriously, but he recognized that professionalism required constant learning. Every person an officer met carried a story that might never be fully visible. Some people carried achievements. Some carried struggles. Some carried years of dedication to serving others. The challenge was remembering that humanity existed before any assumption was made. Michael understood that authority was not only about having the ability to make decisions. It was about understanding the impact those decisions could have on the people affected by them. Police Chief James Holloway recognized that the department had an important responsibility moving forward. The goal was not to create a story about individuals. The goal was to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the community. He believed that accountability and respect were connected. A department that could examine its own actions honestly was a department capable of building stronger trust. The review process became focused on understanding rather than judgment. Officials looked at the available information, the circumstances surrounding the encounter, and the decisions made during that time. This approach reflected an important principle. Fairness requires patience. Quick conclusions rarely reveal the complete truth. Adrian supported the careful process because he understood that emotions could easily distract from meaningful solutions. He had spent his career encouraging people to look beyond the surface, and he believed that same principle applied here. The situation also created conversations throughout the community. Many people began thinking about how quickly assumptions could influence interactions between strangers. A person's appearance, location, or circumstances could never tell the complete story of who they were. The encounter reminded people that respect should not depend on discovering someone's title or achievements. It should exist from the beginning. The greatest lesson was found in the contrast between visible and invisible authority. Michael's badge was immediately recognized. Adrian's leadership was hidden until the truth was revealed. Yet both carried responsibilities that required judgment and integrity. The moment became a reminder that true leadership is not measured by how people act when they are recognized. It is measured by how they act when they believe nobody important is watching. And sometimes, the quietest moments reveal the most important truths. The final understanding of the situation did not come from a title, a position, or the amount of authority someone carried. It came from the choices people made when they were placed in a difficult moment. For Adrian Carter, the experience became another reminder of why he had dedicated his life to public service. He had spent decades protecting the principles of fairness and responsibility, and he knew that those principles mattered most when situations were complicated. He never wanted people to respect him simply because he was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He wanted people to understand that respect should exist because every person deserves dignity before their background or achievements are known. Adrian returned to his responsibilities with the same focus he had always carried. He continued leading with patience, professionalism, and a commitment to the values that guided his career. The attention surrounding the encounter was temporary, but the lesson behind it remained important. A person's title can reveal their position, but it does not reveal their character. Character is revealed through actions, especially during moments when recognition is absent. Michael Turner also carried the experience forward. The encounter became a powerful reminder that every interaction contains more than what can be seen immediately. He continued serving the Westbridge community, but with a deeper awareness of how important it was to look beyond first impressions. His role remained the same, but his understanding of that role became stronger. A badge represented authority, but it also represented a promise to act with fairness and responsibility. Police Chief James Holloway used the moment as an opportunity to reinforce the importance of trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. He understood that strong organizations were not created by avoiding difficult conversations. They were created by facing those conversations with honesty and a willingness to improve. The department continued focusing on professionalism, communication, and the importance of treating every person with respect. Across the community, people reflected on the deeper meaning of what had happened. The story was not simply about a police officer and a federal leader crossing paths. It was about a much larger question: how do people choose to treat one another before they know the full truth? It was about the moments when assumptions appear before understanding. It was about the responsibility that comes with every position of authority. Adrian and Michael represented two different forms of service. One carried national responsibility that remained hidden. The other carried local responsibility that was visible every day. Both roles mattered. Both required integrity. And both revealed that true leadership is measured not by power, but by the respect shown toward others. The most important lesson from the encounter was simple. A person should never need to reveal their title to receive fairness. Respect should not arrive only after someone's importance becomes known. It should exist from the beginning, because in the end, the strongest form of justice is not found in the power someone holds. It is found in the humanity they choose to show. A badge may identify authority, but character defines the person behind it.